We are finally down to what we came here for, and that's the timbers. All the siding has been taken off, and all we have left is the timbers. We're gonna start. It's a little windy out there today, so I probably can't get any audio, but we'll give you a look at the process that I'm going to use to take the timbers down. First thing, we're gonna mark all the joints, so that way when it does go back together, because some of this is gonna be put back together inside the house eventually. So just as an extra step, we're gonna mark all the joints so that we know what piece goes back into where, and the wooden pegs that hold the joints together, we're gonna label those too. So we know exactly where all the pieces go. And then the lean-to section will be separated from the main barn section. So we know exactly what beams came from where, what posts came from where, and hopefully that'll make the reassembling process go a little smoother. Let's get to it. This should be good. So here's an example of how we're doing this. I'm just labeling the joints where what piece of wood goes where, and you can see this one's been nailed. There's no mortise and tenon joinery here. Here's one of the old-time joints with the wood pegs in it, and you can see this joint starting to come apart here. This is where one of the posts has been cut off. So I think it's sagging just a little bit and starting to pull this apart, but we're labeling these two joints so that it goes back together, and just labeling the pins to help out with that. So we'll see how that works. This one's also missing the angled braces that run from here to here, and then also from here down to the post. So that's a weak joint. So it's gonna be interesting getting these together. You can see this one's starting to come apart just a little bit too, I think, because this beam is sagging a little bit to the right. So it's just pulling things apart. That one down there's no joint above it. So I think we may start with this one and kind of see how it goes, because I think that beam, since there's no joint above it, we can just drop this beam here out and drop this whole section out and see how it goes. I tried tapping on one of the pegs yesterday, and two of them were free. I didn't check them all, obviously, but I think we may have some success knocking those pegs back out. We'll see. These pegs here are the only ones that don't go all the way through. These don't have a backside. It actually ends inside the joint. So what I did is I put a screw on the end of this and just put a pry bar on it and pried it just a little bit, and this peg moves. Did the same thing with the other side there.
Man, I apologize for the wind noise. We had gusts up to 30 miles an hour the day we were trying to take these beams and posts out. But we decided to try this first post that was cut off here, and you can see that these were held up. They ran some cabling. At some point, the posts were cut off. I think I mentioned in an earlier video, the posts were cut off to make way for bigger machinery in there. And in order to support the rest of the building, they ran a cable from the two adjacent posts through what was left of that post there where the bucket is underneath to hold it up. And it seemed to do a pretty good job. But we elected to try this beam first because there was no joint above where the post was connected into that top cross member. And we thought we could just lower it and it would drop out. So we knocked the pins out there, and then I went inside the barn and knocked the pin out from where the beam goes into the barn and connects into another beam with the mortise and tenon joinery there as well. Then we just tried the tractor. We tried to back it up there, and it wasn't pulling the beam out. So we put a chain on and pulled it out and just let it drop to the ground, because we at this point didn't know how heavy they were going to be. So we just thought we'd drop the first one in there, kind of pick it up and check it to see how heavy it was. And I was really surprised at how light they were. I think because they were so old and they were so dried out, there's not a lot of weight there. I'm going to guess probably 100, 150 pounds right there for each post. But it came out just like we planned, and we decided to move on to the next beam, which is at the other end of where the barn was, where we took the doors off in an earlier video. And things so far are going well and as planned.
That went way better than expected. First beam we have out. Now what we're going to do is take this top beam off. There's one pin holding it over in that corner, and then on the other side just 4 nails. So I'm thinking we're going to go ahead and pick that beam up. This post we have anchored so it doesn't fall in, and the other post has some boards connected to the other building, so we're hoping that doesn't fall in. We'll get this beam taken out and the post over here taken out next.
Now it's time for beam number 2 and the first full post that we take out. These are the pins that I put the screws in. I just pull those out with our pry bar, and those come out pretty easy. And you can see that post there on the right hand side of the screen. We did some extra bracing on that just to make sure that the whole thing didn't tip over once we lifted this beam off. The other post on the left hand side, I used my Sawzall to cut the 4 nails off up there. I think this post was modified at some point when they put these doors in. It does have some mortise and tenon joinery at the bottom, but the top was nailed in and cut off. And there you see I forgot one of the nails or didn't get it cut all the way. So we cut that off and it comes right out, and both posts stay standing. We take the cross bracing out. I had a little trouble with this cross brace on the right hand side here. There was a couple of nails that somebody had put in it at some point, so I had to use the Sawzall to cut that out, and we were able to eventually pull that brace out and save it. Then up next was the post on the left hand side. We have 2 girt boards that were holding that post up, one at the bottom and the one at the top there. We just cut those off with the Sawzall and lay the post down. Once we get it on the ground, bring the tractor over, put it on the loader, and take it over to the concrete pad in the main section of the barn. Now here's where things get a little risky here, and we weren't 100% sure what was going to happen with this center post that was cut off, because there was a splice in the beam above it that I showed earlier, and that connection was starting to separate. So we put the bucket on the tractor underneath there just for a little bit of insurance in case when I take this cable down it decides to start to come down. We at least have the tractor there and I can get back and not be in the way. But we let the cable loose, and to much of our surprise here, the joint stays together and carries that beam underneath of it. The beam underneath is mortise and tenon joinery, and then it's connected back to the building off on the left-hand side. It runs into a big post in the building as well, one of the corner posts. So this worked out really well. I was really nervous with this connection. This is the one beam that I was a little bit worried about, but it all turned out good. We were able to save everything, which was really nice. And it's amazing that this cable system that was used held up over time. I mean, that's probably been in there a good 50 years or more. I'm not sure exactly when they cut those posts off, but it worked and it held for a really long time. But now it's time to take it down. We clean the wiring out of there, pull it through the hole that's in the post, and then we drop the bucket, and the post stays and the joint stays together, which was a big relief. So then we could move over to the left side of that post and start to take that beam down, because the way it was jointed at the top, the left beam is sitting on top of the right beam. So that needed to come down first. And here we decide, let's go ahead and lower the bucket a little bit. And once it holds, we back up and start with the next beam. At this point, I'm thinking to myself, we're in pretty good shape, and I'm feeling pretty confident about being able to harvest the rest of these timbers without running into any big issues. This joint on that right-hand side there where the post was cut off was my biggest worry, and we're going to take this beam off here And as you'll see, that joint, amazingly enough, those pegs were still in there pretty tight, and I have to pound those pegs out for him to lift that beam off. We just push that post over, get it out of the way, come over here and get this beam off, get the connection, get the pins out of the connection there, and we're able to separate it. We actually dropped the beam, but I was out of the way and nothing was damaged there. Take that back over to the main section on the concrete, and then we get the bracing off the post and do the same with it. Take it over to the main section of the building, and we're down to the last half of that connection there. And since it stayed together so well, we decided to just do the same with this beam as we did with the very first one. Punch the pegs out here to disconnect it from the overhead beam, and then I go back into the building and disconnect the beam from the corner post in the building, and then we just use the tractor, tip the bucket back to hold it in there and just pull it out. It seems to work really well. We salvage that one and take it back to the concrete as well. The rest is pretty easy at this point. This next beam was the longest one out of the bunch. This one measured 25 feet end to end, and it'll be a nice beam to have for the barn door build. And you can see here, I was confident in putting my ladder up there because when you look down on the top side, that beam is set into a peg on the post. They cut a notch out, and you'll see here when he picks it up, the notch. I actually have to knock it free because it's in there pretty good. You can see there how that beam is set on top and meant to hold those posts in place. Pretty interesting. So we get that off, take it back to the concrete, and then we decided this one, let's just go ahead and knock the peg out of the barn beam, and we'll just pull it down. And we do the same with that far one where you see my ladder is propped up against. We just do the same thing there. Pull it out and let it fall to the ground. It's not falling far, so we felt pretty confident with it. And again, we were able to harvest everything. Everything was labeled, marked, so if we wanted to put it back together, we could put it back together the way it came apart. And yeah, pretty amazing stuff that these things held for 100 years or more. We get the pegs out of that beam and post and let it fall to the ground.
I don't know what a lark looks like when it's happy, but I am happy as a lark right now. All the posts on the lean-to are down. We didn't damage anything, and we've cleaned everything up over there, and we are in good shape. Unfortunately, it's way too windy for me to get a drone shot, so I'm just gonna go ahead and give you guys a look at the side of the building with everything cleaned off. I am just ecstatic that we got everything taken down, and we have 12, we're gonna end up having 13 beams, which is really, really cool. They need obviously a lot of work done to them yet. We need to clean them up, we need to treat them and get them ready to put in the house, which will come later on down the road, and that'll be one of the episodes, probably towards the end of the series, before we get them inside the house, all finished up nice and pretty. That takes care of the lean-to. The next portion of this building is going to be taking down the main section, and I've learned a lot in the last week and a couple of days just by taking down that little section of the building. And when I mean little, it was 14 feet wide by 50 feet long, with the longest beam being 25 feet long. So it was big, but not anything to what this building is. So I think when we go to do this building, we're definitely gonna have to have some big muscle, some big machinery to get things taken down if we wanna try to salvage anything. Because some of these timbers, I believe the beams up top are one long beam, which is gonna make them almost 56 feet long, I believe. So we're gonna have to have some big time help to get that down safely. But that'll be coming probably next spring. We'll see how things work out. But in the meantime, this winter, I'm gonna come inside and try to get the siding on the inside of this horse stable, or what used to be a horse stable, get it stripped off because it's in really good shape, and get that home and we could start refinishing it. But we are well on the way. Thanks for joining us on this journey. This is just part of it. There's a lot more to come. I'm really, really excited. I hope things turn out well. And we're gonna take this wood back to North Carolina and see what we can come up with, the best way to process it and clean it and get it ready to put in the house. That'll be coming up on a later video. Again, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you guys learned something. I know I learned a ton. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.